The message arrived at Orbital Station 12 on a standard diplomatic channel, but everyone knew it was anything but standard. Emperor Valdric of the Vexorian Empire was sending one of his daughters to serve as a cultural liaison. On paper, it looked like an honor. In reality, the entire station staff could smell the setup from a light year away. Station Chief Rebecca Walsh called Tom Bradley into her office that morning with an apologetic look already plastered on her face. Tom wiped the hydraulic fluid off his hands and knew immediately he was about to get stuck with something nobody else wanted to deal with. "They are sending us a princess," Rebecca said, sliding the official documentation across her desk. Tom raised an eyebrow. "A princess? To work in my repair bay?" "Princess Lyra, eldest daughter of Emperor Valdric himself." Rebecca pulled up a holographic image. The Vexorian woman in the photo had a sturdy build, especially by her species standards. She looked strong and capable, but Tom could already read between the lines. He'd been working with alien species long enough to understand their politics. The Vexorians prized bodies so thin they looked like they might snap in a strong breeze. Their nobles practically starved themselves to maintain that skeletal appearance they considered beautiful. This princess clearly didn't fit that mold. "Let me guess," Tom said, leaning back against the wall. "Daddy Dearest is sending her here to embarrass her. Figures we humans are shallow enough to treat her poorly, she'll come crawling back home, and he gets to say he tried cultural exchange." "That's my read on it too." Rebecca sighed heavily. "I'm assigning her to you because you're the only person on this station who won't play into whatever game he's running. Think you can handle it?" Tom shrugged. "I need someone who can actually lift things and isn't afraid to get dirty. If she's willing to work, I don't care what her father thinks of her." 3 days later, Princess Lyra arrived on a small Vexorian shuttle. Tom watched from the bay window as she disembarked, carrying a single bag. She wore simple traveling clothes, not the elaborate robes he'd expected from royalty. 2 Vexorian attendants followed her, both sporting those fashionably skeletal frames, and both looking at her with barely concealed disdain. The attendants didn't even help her with her luggage. They simply transmitted the formal documents to Rebecca and departed on the same shuttle that brought them. The message was clear: the Emperor's court wanted nothing to do with her. Tom met her in the station's main corridor. Up close, Lyra stood about 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and what humans would consider an athletic build. Her skin had the characteristic blue-silver tone of Vexorians, and her eyes were large and dark. She looked nervous but was clearly trying to hide it behind a mask of royal dignity. "Princess Lyra?" Tom extended his hand. "I'm Tom Bradley. You'll be working with me in Bay 7. She stared at his outstretched hand for a moment before carefully shaking it. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Just Lyra is fine. I assume you've been briefed on why I'm actually here." Tom appreciated the directness. "I assume your father's testing something. Don't really care what. I need help in the repair bay, and if you're willing to work, we'll get along fine." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite relief, but close. "I'm willing to work." "Good. Fair warning, it's going to be hot, dirty, and sometimes dangerous. I don't do special treatment, and I don't do babysitting. You keep up or you wash out. Clear?" "Clear." Tom led her through the station's industrial section. Bay 7 was the largest repair facility on the station, currently housing a damaged cargo hauler, 2 fighter craft with blown engines, and a transport ship that had taken meteor damage to its hull. The smell of welding torch smoke and coolant filled the air. The rest of Tom's crew looked up as they entered. There was Danny at the welding station, Julie working on an engine mount, and old Russell calibrating a plasma torch. They all gave Lyra curious looks but went back to work without comment. Tom had trained them well. "First things first," Tom said, pointing to a wall of tool cabinets. "Everything has a place. Tools go back where they belong, every time, no exceptions. I don't care if the station's on fire, you put the wrench back before you evacuate. Organization saves lives when you're working on systems that can explode." Lyra nodded, studying the labeled cabinets with genuine interest. "Second, safety protocols aren't suggestions. You see something dangerous, you speak up. I don't care if you're new or if someone's been doing it wrong for years. Safety first, ego never." "Understood." Tom grabbed a spare set of coveralls from a locker and tossed them to her. "Get changed. We'll start you on basic systems familiarization. Can't have you working on anything critical until I know what you actually know." As Lyra headed to the changing room, Danny wandered over with a grin. "Boss, you know that's actual royalty, right?" "She's crew now," Tom said simply. Treat her like anyone else on their first day. When Lyra returned in the coveralls, she looked more comfortable than she had in her traveling clothes. Tom spent the rest of that shift walking her through the bay's layout, explaining human safety standards, and testing her knowledge of basic engineering principles. He discovered quickly that she wasn't just some pampered royal being dumped on them. She knew her way around mechanical systems and asked intelligent questions. When he handed her a damaged circuit board and asked her to identify the problem, she spotted the blown capacitor in under 30 seconds. By the end of the shift, Tom had her sorting components and learning the inventory system. Nothing glamorous, but essential work that let him evaluate her attention to detail. As the crew clocked out for the evening, Lyra lingered near the tool cabinets, making sure everything was properly organized. Tom noticed but didn't comment. He just made a mental note that she'd actually listened to his priorities. "See you at 0600 tomorrow," he called out as he headed for the exit. "I'll be here," Lyra replied. Tom allowed himself a small smile. Maybe this wouldn't be the disaster everyone expected after all. The Emperor wanted to send his daughter somewhere she'd fail. He'd just made the mistake of sending her somewhere that valued work ethic over appearance. That was going to be an expensive mistake. 2 weeks into Princess Lyra's assignment, Tom started giving her real work. Not the babysitting tasks he'd used to keep a dignitary busy, but actual repairs that mattered. She'd earned it. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning when they were struggling with a massive engine component that needed repositioning. The part weighed close to 400 pounds, and the lifting rig had malfunctioned the day before. Tom and Danny were trying to maneuver it manually when Lyra simply stepped in, got proper leverage, and helped lift it into place without breaking a sweat. Tom blinked in surprise. Most Vexorians he'd met could barely lift a toolbox. Their fashionably thin frames weren't built for physical labor, which was exactly why they relied so heavily on automation and servant classes. "You're stronger than you look," Danny said, clearly impressed. Lyra shrugged, but Tom caught the hint of pride in her expression. "My body type isn't valued on my world, but it has practical advantages they refuse to acknowledge." "Well, it's valued here," Tom said matter-of-factly. "Half the jobs in this bay require someone who can actually handle heavy components. Julie's got the strength, but she's usually tied up with precision work. Having another person who can pull their weight literally? That's worth its weight in platinum." Something shifted in Lyra's posture. She stood a little straighter after that. Over the following days, Tom discovered that Lyra's capabilities went far beyond physical strength. She had an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that surprised even him. When he explained how human fusion cores differed from Vexorian antimatter reactors, she didn't just memorize the information. She asked questions that showed she was thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating problems before they occurred. By the 3rd week, Tom had her doing welding work. He spent an afternoon teaching her the basics, showing her how to maintain the right angle, the proper speed, and how to read the metal's color to know when it was ready. She picked it up faster than anyone he'd trained in years. "You've done this before," Tom said, watching her lay down a near-perfect bead on a practice plate. "My father had me tutored in engineering when I was younger," Lyra admitted, not looking up from her work. "He thought it would make me a more valuable marriage prospect. Ironic, since he eventually decided I wasn't valuable at all." Tom heard the pain under those words but knew better than to poke at fresh wounds. Instead, he just nodded. His loss. "You've got good hands for this work." That became their pattern. Tom would teach, Lyra would learn at a pace that honestly impressed him, and slowly she began to relax. The nervous edge she carried those first few days faded away. In the bay, covered in grease and sweat, she smiled more than she probably ever had in the Imperial Palace. The rest of the crew accepted her completely. Danny started saving her the good pastries from the station cafeteria. Julie invited her to the weekly poker game. Old Russell, who rarely talked to anyone, started sharing stories about his 40 years working on different stations across the galaxy. One afternoon, Tom and Lyra were deep in the guts of a transport ship, replacing a damaged power coupling. The space was tight, hot, and required them to work in tandem. Tom would call out what he needed, and Lyra would hand him the right tool without him having to specify. That kind of synchronization usually took months to develop. "You know what I appreciate about this place?" Lyra said suddenly, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "What's that?" "Nobody here has mentioned my weight once. Not as criticism, not as concern, not as anything. On my world, it's all anyone talks about. How I need to lose mass, how I'm an embarrassment, how no proper Vexorian should look like me." She paused. "Here, the only time my body comes up is when someone needs help moving something heavy." Tom tightened the coupling before responding. That's because here, we care about whether you can do the job. Everything else is just noise. He slid out from under the panel and looked at her directly. And for the record, you're built perfect for this work. Strong enough to handle the physical demands, smart enough to understand the systems, and coordinated enough to do precision work. That's the trifecta right there. Lyra's eyes went wide. In all her years, no one had ever framed her body as an advantage. As something perfectly suited for a purpose, rather than a flaw to be corrected or hidden. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me. Just keep doing good work. But the moment stuck with both of them. Tom realized he'd been thinking about Lyra differently for a while now. Not as a temporary assignment or a political hot potato, but as a genuine member of his crew. Someone he relied on. Someone whose company he actually enjoyed during those long repair shifts. As for Lyra, she was experiencing something completely foreign to her upbringing. For the first time in her life, she felt competent. Valued. Like she belonged somewhere, not despite her appearance but simply because of who she was and what she could do. The breakthrough came during a crisis in Week 5. A civilian ship limped into the station with critical hull damage and a failing life support system. They had maybe 6 hours before the crew would start suffocating. It was all hands on deck, and Tom's Bay got the job because they were the only ones with the capacity to handle emergency structural work of that scale. Tom coordinated the effort like a conductor leading an orchestra. Lyra worked beside him, welding emergency patches while he reinforced the damaged sections. They worked for 4 straight hours without a break, racing against the clock. When they finally restored hull integrity and got life support back online with 90 minutes to spare, the entire bay erupted in tired cheers. The civilian crew came down to thank them personally, and the captain specifically shook Lyra's hand, saying she'd done work that would have taken his people days to accomplish. That night, the bay crew celebrated at the station's rec room. Someone bought a round of drinks, and Danny raised his glass. To Lyra, who went from princess to the best damn apprentice this bay has ever seen. Everyone cheered and clinked glasses. Lyra sat there, surrounded by people who respected her, valued her, and genuinely seemed to enjoy her company. She looked over at Tom, who gave her a small nod and a smile. She smiled back, and for the first time since arriving at the station, she felt something she'd never experienced in the Imperial Palace. She felt like she was home. Tom caught that smile and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about training a good mechanic anymore. Somewhere along the way, surrounded by engine grease and welding sparks, he'd started caring about the person behind the work. And from the way she looked at him, he suspected she might be feeling something similar. But that was a complication for another day. For now, they had ships to repair and a crew that worked like a well-oiled machine. Everything else could wait. The Imperial Vexorian flagship arrived without warning on a Thursday morning, emerging from hyperspace with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Station Chief Rebecca Walsh's face went pale when she saw the identification codes. Emperor Valdric himself had come to visit his daughter. Tom was elbow-deep in a thruster assembly when Rebecca's voice crackled over his comm unit. Tom, we've got a situation. The Emperor just docked. He's asking to see his daughter immediately. Tom glanced over at Lyra, who had frozen in place, a plasma wrench still in her hand. Her expression shifted from confusion to dread in about 2 seconds flat. Copy that, Tom said into the comm. We'll need about 10 minutes to reach a stopping point on this repair. Tom, he wants to see her now. Then he can wait 10 minutes. I'm not leaving a thruster assembly half-finished. That's how people die. Tom switched off the comm and looked at Lyra. You okay? She shook her head slowly. He wasn't supposed to come here. This wasn't part of the plan. What plan? The plan where he sends me away, I fail miserably, and I come crawling back home to beg forgiveness. He's here early because... She stopped, her eyes widening. Because someone told him I'm doing well. He's here to see it for himself. Tom wiped his hands on a rag. Then let's give him something to see. Keep that grease on your face. Don't change out of your coveralls. He wanted you working in a repair bay, so let him see exactly what that looks like. They finished securing the thruster assembly properly, because Tom Bradley didn't cut corners even for emperors. Then they made their way to the station's diplomatic receiving area, where the entire Imperial entourage had assembled. Emperor Valdric stood at the center of the room, surrounded by a dozen attendants who all shared that skeletal frame the Vexorian nobility prized. They wore flowing robes of deep purple and silver, and every single one of them looked like they'd never done a day of physical labor in their lives. The Emperor himself was tall and thin, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they looked at. Those eyes landed on Lyra, and his expression twisted into something between disgust and disappointment. "Daughter," he said, his voice cold. "You look absolutely filthy." "I've been working, father," Lyra replied, keeping her voice steady. "That's what happens in a repair bay." "Working." He said the word like it tasted bad. "I sent you here expecting the humans would treat you with the contempt you deserve. Instead, I'm told you've been embraced by these primitives. That you've actually been doing manual labor like some common servant." Tom felt his jaw tighten, but he kept quiet. This wasn't his conversation yet. One of the Emperor's attendants stepped forward, holding up a datapad. "Your Majesty, the reports indicate she's been welding, moving heavy equipment, and performing repairs on actual spacecraft. She's covered in industrial fluids and appears to have gained even more mass during her time here." The way he said mass made it sound like a disease. Emperor Valdric approached his daughter, circling her like she was a specimen under examination. "Look at you. You're even more unsuitable now than when you left. Muscles from physical labor. Your hands are calloused. You smell like engine coolant." "She smells like honest work," Tom said, unable to keep quiet any longer. "Something I suspect is foreign to everyone in this room except her." The Emperor's cold gaze shifted to Tom. "And you must be the mechanic who's been corrupting my daughter with your human notions of equality and worth." "I'm the mechanic who's been training the best apprentice I've ever had," Tom replied evenly. "Her species doesn't matter. Her family doesn't matter. What matters is that she's skilled, dedicated, and someone I'd trust to work on any ship in this station." "Trust." The Emperor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You trust her because you humans don't understand proper social hierarchy. You don't recognize that some beings are simply born inferior." Before Tom could respond, Danny's voice came from the doorway. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, that's garbage." Tom turned to see his entire crew filing into the room. Danny, Julie, Russell, and a half-dozen other mechanics and technicians from Bay 7. They all still wore their work coveralls, and they all looked angry. Julie stepped forward. "Lyra saved a ship and 23 lives 3 weeks ago. She worked 4 hours straight doing emergency hull repairs that most certified technicians couldn't handle. If that's what you call inferior, I'd hate to see what you consider superior." Russell, who rarely spoke more than 2 words at a time, added his piece. "Best welder I've seen in 40 years. Fast learner. Hard worker. That girl's got more value in her little finger than your whole fancy court combined." The Emperor's face darkened. "How dare you speak to me this way? Do you know who I am?" "We know exactly who you are," Tom said. "You're the man who sent his daughter here as a joke, expecting her to fail so you could prove some point about her worthlessness. Well, she didn't fail. She succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. And now you can't handle that. It ruins your narrative." Emperor Valdric turned back to his daughter. "This is unacceptable. You will return to the homeworld immediately. These humans have corrupted you, filled your head with false notions of your own capability. You need to be reminded of your place." "No," Lyra said quietly. The entire room went silent. One of the attendants actually gasped. "What did you say?" The Emperor's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I said no, father." Lyra stood straighter, and Tom saw her hands had stopped shaking. "I've spent my entire life being told I was wrong. That my body was wrong, my interests were wrong, that I was fundamentally flawed. And I believed it because everyone around me said the same thing." She gestured at Tom and the crew behind her. "These people showed me something different. They showed me that I'm not flawed. I'm strong. I'm capable. I'm valuable exactly as I am. And I'm not going back to a place where I'm made to feel worthless every single day." The Emperor's face went from dark to nearly purple with rage. "You ungrateful child. After everything I've provided for you, the education, the status, the privilege of royal blood, and this is how you repay me? By choosing these aliens over your own family." "They treat me better than my family ever did," Lyra shot back, and Tom heard her voice crack slightly. "They see me as a person, not a disappointment." Emperor Valdric looked around the room, his expression calculating. "If you stay here, I will sever the alliance between the Vexorian Empire and this station. I will ensure that no Vexorian ship ever docks here again. Your little repair bay will lose a significant portion of its business. Is that what you want? To be responsible for an economic disaster?" Tom stepped up beside Lyra, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "We'll survive. Good work speaks for itself," and word gets around. We don't need clients who think treating people with basic respect is corruption. The other crew members moved closer too, forming a loose semicircle around Lyra. A wall of support made of grease-stained coveralls and calloused hands. Rebecca Walsh's voice came over the station-wide comms. Station Chief Walsh to Emperor Valdric. While we value our relationship with the Vexorian Empire, we don't negotiate with threats. If you choose to end our alliance over this, that's your decision to make. But Princess Lyra is under this station's protection for as long as she wishes to remain here. The Emperor stared at his daughter for a long moment. Tom could see him trying to decide if she was worth the political complication of actually following through on his threats. Finally, he spoke. Very well. Stay here with your human friends. But understand this, you are no longer my daughter. You are no longer a princess of the Vexorian Empire. You are nothing. He turned and swept out of the room, his attendants scrambling to follow. The moment the door closed behind them, Lyra's legs gave out. Tom caught her before she could fall, and she grabbed onto his arm like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. I just gave up everything, she whispered. No, Tom said firmly. You just chose something better. The crew helped Lyra back to Bay 7 after the confrontation. She moved like someone in shock, her legs functioning on autopilot while her mind tried to process what had just happened. Tom guided her to his office, a small cluttered space at the back of the bay where he did paperwork and pretended to organize things. Julie brought her water. Danny dragged over a spare chair. Russell just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, like he was standing guard. Nobody said much. They all understood that sometimes a person just needed space to breathe. After about 20 minutes, Lyra finally spoke. He's going to follow through on his threats. The Emperor doesn't make empty promises. Tom leaned against his desk. Then we'll deal with it. Stations survived worse than losing one client base. You don't understand, Lyra said, her voice strained. The Vexorian Empire controls trade routes through 3 sectors. They have influence with a dozen other species. If my father decides to make an example of this station, he can damage more than just your business. He can damage your reputation, your relationships with other governments. This could affect thousands of people. And that's on him, not you, Julie said firmly. He's the one making the choice to be petty. You're just choosing not to be miserable anymore. Lyra shook her head. Is it worth it though? All of this disruption, all of this potential harm, just because I don't want to go home. Tom studied her carefully. Are we talking about logistics here, or are we talking about you trying to convince yourself to go back? The question hung in the air. Lyra stared at her hands, still stained with grease from the morning's work. Her fingers were calloused now, rough from tools and labor. Hands that her father had looked at with disgust just an hour ago. I don't know, she admitted quietly. Part of me knows that staying is the right choice. That going back would be returning to a life where I'm constantly reminded how inadequate I am. But another part of me feels selfish. Like I'm putting my own happiness above the well-being of everyone on this station. That's not selfish, Danny said. That's just being a person. Everyone deserves to be somewhere they're not treated like trash. Russell grunted in agreement. Your old man's banking on you feeling guilty. That's how bullies work. They make you think their bad behavior is your fault. Station Chief Rebecca appeared in the doorway, looking tired. I need to talk to Lyra privately, if that's all right. The crew filed out, though Tom hesitated. Lyra gave him a small nod, and he left, closing the door behind him. But he didn't go far. He stood just outside, not quite eavesdropping but definitely within earshot if things went wrong. Inside the office, Rebecca pulled up a chair. I've been in contact with the diplomatic corps. They're aware of the situation, and they've given me authorization to offer you formal asylum if you want it. Lyra looked up, surprised. Asylum? Isn't that usually for people fleeing persecution or danger? You're fleeing a situation where you're psychologically abused and devalued, Rebecca said bluntly. That counts. If you claim asylum, you'd be under Earth Alliance protection. Your father couldn't legally force you to return, and any retaliation he took would be against Earth, not just this station. That might actually make him think twice. Or it might make things worse. Maybe. But here's what I know, I've been running stations for 20 years. I've seen a lot of political theater, a lot of powerful people making threats. Most of them are bluffing. Your father showed up here expecting to find you miserable and the crew treating you poorly. Instead, he found the opposite, and it threatened his worldview. That makes him dangerous in the short term, but in the long term? I think he'll move on to other concerns. Lyra stood and walked to the small window that overlooked the bay. Down below, she could see the crew getting back to work. Tom was talking to Danny about something, pointing at a schematic on a datapad. Normal work. Normal life. The kind of normal she'd never had before. What if I stayed and things did get worse? Lyra asked. What if ships stopped coming here, contracts got cancelled, people lost their jobs? Could I live with myself knowing I caused that? Rebecca joined her at the window. Can you live with yourself going back to a place where you're treated as less than nothing? Because that's the actual choice here. Not between your happiness and other people's well-being. Between standing up for yourself and letting someone bully you into submission. Down in the bay, Tom looked up and caught sight of Lyra in the window. He didn't wave or smile, just held her gaze for a moment. Steady. Solid. Present. Something in Lyra's chest tightened. Over the past 2 months, Tom had become important to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. He'd treated her like an equal from day one. He'd taught her without condescension. He'd valued her contributions without making a big deal about it. And somewhere along the way, working side by side in the heat and grease of the repair bay, she'd started seeing him as more than just her supervisor. She'd started caring about him. Maybe more than caring. The door opened and Tom stuck his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation that might actually help make your decision easier. What situation? Rebecca asked. 3 Vexorian ships just requested emergency docking. They've got critical systems failures and they're 12 hours from the nearest alternative station. The Emperor's flagship is still docked here. If we refuse service to these ships, people could die. If we provide service, the Emperor's going to see his own people choosing human help over his political theater. Rebecca's eyes lit up. That's perfect. Lyra, what do you think? Want to help repair ships from your own empire while your father watches? Lyra felt a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. That seems appropriately ironic. More than ironic, Tom said. It proves a point. The people who actually do the work, the ones flying the ships and keeping things running, they don't care about your father's pride. They care about getting home safely. And they're trusting us to help them do that. Lyra made her decision. I want to stay. I want to claim asylum. And I want to help repair those ships. Rebecca nodded. I'll start the paperwork. Tom, get your crew ready for multiple emergency repairs. Already on it, Tom said. Then, more quietly, just to Lyra, you sure about this? No, Lyra admitted. But I'm more sure about this than I've ever been about anything involving my father's plans for me. Tom reached out and squeezed her shoulder briefly. Then let's get to work. They headed down to the bay floor together. The crew was already prepping stations for the incoming ships. Word had spread fast, and everyone knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about repairs anymore. It was about proving that good work and basic decency mattered more than political games. Lyra grabbed her toolkit and fell into the familiar rhythm of preparation. Check the welding equipment, verify tool inventory, review the schematics for Vexorian ship systems. Muscle memory and training taking over, pushing the anxiety into the background. One of the Vexorian ships docked, and the captain came down to the bay personally. He looked exhausted and stressed. When he saw Lyra, his eyes widened in recognition. Princess Lyra? What are you doing here? Helping repair your ship, Captain. That's what I do now. The captain glanced around nervously. Does the Emperor know you're working on Vexorian vessels? Probably watching on security feeds as we speak, Tom said cheerfully. Now, you want to tell us what's wrong with your ship, or you want to keep worrying about politics while your crew sits in a disabled vessel? The captain's priorities snapped back into place. Right. Our primary power coupling failed, and we've got a cascade starting in the secondary systems. Tom and Lyra exchanged a look. They dealt with that exact problem 2 weeks ago on a different ship. They both knew the solution, and they both knew they could handle it. We've got this, Tom said. And somehow, with those 3 simple words, Lyra knew everything was going to be okay. The asylum paperwork took 3 days to process. During that time, Lyra and Tom's crew repaired all 3 Vexorian ships that had requested emergency service. Emperor Valdric's flagship remained docked the entire time, and everyone knew he was watching every move his former daughter made. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The princess he'd sent away as a joke was now keeping his own citizens safe, doing work that his skeletal nobles could never manage. When the 3rd ship departed, its captain personally thanked Lyra and slipped her a data chip before leaving. What's on it? Tom asked after the captain had gone. Lyra plugged it into a reader, and her eyes went wide. Contact information. He says if I ever need work, half the independent Vexorian shipping fleet would hire me in a heartbeat. Apparently, word's been spreading about the princess who became a mechanic. Tom grinned. Guess your father's plan backfired pretty spectacularly. The Emperor's flagship departed the next morning without ceremony. No formal goodbyes, no final confrontation. He simply left, and the station collectively exhaled. Rebecca reported that the threatened sanctions never materialized. Apparently, the diplomatic corps had made it clear that persecuting someone for claiming asylum would have consequences the Emperor wasn't willing to face. Lyra was free. Truly free, for the first time in her life. The realization hit her one evening about a week later. She was in Bay 7, finishing up some routine maintenance, when it suddenly struck her that she could do anything she wanted. She could stay here, leave for another station, take one of those job offers from the shipping fleet. No one controlled her choices anymore. The freedom was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Tom found her sitting on a tool crate, staring at nothing. You okay? I don't know what to do, she said honestly. I've spent my whole life having every decision made for me. Now I can choose anything, and I have no idea where to even start. Tom sat down beside her. Well, what do you want? That's the problem. I don't know. I know what I don't want. I don't want to go back to being treated like I'm worthless. I don't want to spend my life trying to fit into standards that were never meant for me. But wanting to avoid something isn't the same as knowing what you want to move toward. Fair point. Tom was quiet for a moment, then asked, Are you happy here? Lyra thought about it. The long shifts, the physical exhaustion, the satisfaction of fixing something broken. The easy camaraderie of the crew, the way Danny always saved her dessert, how Julie had taught her to play poker. The feeling of accomplishment when a ship left the bay in better condition than it arrived. And Tom. Working beside him every day, learning from him, the comfortable silence they developed where they could practically read each other's minds during complex repairs. Yes, she said. I'm happy here. Happier than I've ever been. Then stay. At least until you figure out what else you might want. Just like that. Tom shrugged. Why complicate it? You're good at the work, you like the work, we like having you here. Everything else is just noise. It was such a typically Tom response. Practical, straightforward, cutting through all the anxiety to the simple truth underneath. Lyra felt something warm spread through her chest. Tom, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you treat me normally from the beginning? You knew I was a princess. You knew my father was setting me up to fail. But you just treated me like anyone else. Tom considered the question. Honestly? Because I've seen too many people get judged for things that don't matter. Species, background, what they look like. None of that tells you whether someone's going to be good at their job or good to work with. I figured I'd judge you on what you actually did, not what your title was or what your father thought of you. And what's your judgment? He looked at her directly, and Lyra felt her breath catch. I think you're one of the best mechanics I've ever trained. I think you've got instincts that can't be taught and work ethic that's rare in any species. And I think you're someone I've come to care about a lot more than just as a crew member. There it was. Out in the open. The thing they'd both been dancing around for weeks. I care about you too, Lyra said softly. More than I probably should, considering everything that's complicated about this situation. What's complicated about it? Well, you're human, I'm Vexorian. You're my supervisor. I just got out of a situation where I had no control over my life. There are about a dozen reasons why this might be a terrible idea. Tom smiled. Or we could focus on the reasons it might be a good idea. We work well together. We respect each other. We actually like spending time together even when we're not working. And unless I'm completely misreading things, there's something here worth exploring. Lyra felt herself smiling back. You're not misreading things. Then how about we take it slow, see where it goes, and not worry about all the reasons it's complicated. Life's complicated anyway. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Really? That's kind of sad. Lyra laughed, and the sound echoed through the empty bay. Welcome to my life. The bar was very, very low. Tom stood and offered her his hand. Come on. Danny's organizing a celebration dinner for your asylum approval. The whole crew's going to be there. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They stood there for a moment, hands still clasped, and Lyra realized this was what home felt like. Not a place, but a person. A group of people who valued you for who you were. The celebration dinner turned into a regular thing. Every Friday night, the Bay 7 crew would gather at the station's rec room, sharing food and stories. More Vexorians started showing up, ones who'd heard about Lyra and wanted to see if the rumors were true. Some were like her, built broader and stronger than their society's ideal. Others were just tired of the rigid hierarchy and strict social rules. Within 6 months, there were enough Vexorian workers on the station that they formed their own support network. Lyra found herself becoming an unofficial ambassador, helping newly arrived Vexorians navigate human social customs and find work that suited their skills. Tom's repair bay expanded. They took on 2 more full-time mechanics and started handling more complex jobs. Lyra became his second-in-command, the person he trusted to run things when he wasn't available. Their professional partnership was seamless, and their personal relationship grew naturally alongside it. A year after her arrival, Tom and Lyra were working late on a particularly stubborn propulsion system when he stopped and looked at her. "What?" she asked, noticing his expression. "I was just thinking about your father's joke. Sending you here expecting you to fail." "And?" "He sent me exactly what I wanted. Someone strong enough to handle the physical work, smart enough to master complex systems, and stubborn enough not to quit when things get hard. Plus, someone I'm completely in love with, which was an unexpected bonus." Lyra's tools clattered to the floor. "You're in love with me?" Tom looked surprised at himself. "Apparently I am. That okay?" She crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and kissed him. When they finally broke apart, she was grinning. "More than okay. Because I'm in love with you too." "Well then," Tom said, pulling her close again. "I'd say things worked out pretty well." And they had. The princess who was sent away as a cruel joke had found exactly where she belonged. In a repair bay, covered in grease, surrounded by people who valued her for who she was. Working beside someone who saw her not as a disappointment or a joke, but as exactly what she'd always been. Someone worth caring about. Someone worth loving. The Emperor had meant to humiliate his daughter. Instead, he'd given her the greatest gift possible, the chance to discover her own worth. And she'd taken that chance and built something better than he could ever understand.